Welcome to the Institute for Management Studies Leadership Conversations podcast, where we have leading thought leaders discussing their research and identifying ways that you can incorporate it to take your learning and development to the next level. Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and strategies that you can apply from discussing the research from esteemed leadership experts and practitioners to take your leadership to the next level. My goal with this podcast is that what we discuss will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear in the comments for this episode what you are planning to implement. Today, I'm glad to be joined by Dr. Richard Brinkman, who is the developer of conscious communication and shares human behavior insights and content-rich communication strategies, which has helped organizations improve leadership performance and apply principles of that conscious communication model. This effective approach to communication has been delivered to millions of people through keynotes, trainings, radio, television, and print interviews, and he is also an international best-selling author of Dealing with People You Can't Stand: How to Bring Out the Best in People at Their Worst. With that, love to introduce Dr. Brinkman. Rick, thanks for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure, Charles, anytime. Hello, everybody out there in difficult people land.
Yes, we always have this topic. It has evergreen content where it's always in need. And we see a lot of people coming back to our programs that run this content year in, every year, just because they have different difficult people they're dealing with, or they haven't mastered this skill, which is always a difficult skill for most leaders to master. Would you agree, Rick?
Yeah, difficult in some ways, but really, if you pay attention, since you really technically already know how to communicate and you have a zillion opportunities every day to practice and see what works and what doesn't work, if you pay attention, this is one thing that you don't have to go out of your way to really learn.
I would agree with you, and that conscious communication really is critical in this. And I love how you say that there's really four choices you have when dealing with difficult people.
Mm-hmm.
The first option, which I think many leaders take, you can say and do nothing.
Nothing's a choice, but suffering falls in that category, so be careful.
So that includes suffering, complaining about doing nothing. It can be dangerous because it gets very frustrating to you, which over time can bubble up, boil over, and have other consequences or get worse over time. So it is a choice. It's not the most effective choice and not the preferred choice. So
one other thing you would say is if you're in a leadership position, it's your responsibility to do something, because doing nothing and letting that behavior go is going to demoralize other people on your team. It's not going to bring out the best in them. So it's the responsibility of a leader to learn the skills they need to do something about it.
Very well said. So that's not an option for leaders that are listening. So we'll take that off the table right now. Second one.
Okay.
You can vote with your feet, which may work in some situations, but once again, if you're in a leadership role, your best option probably is just not to walk away.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, you got to weigh, is it worth it to you? And sometimes it's not, but that's a huge decision. You know, is the job worth it? Is the relationship worth it, et cetera?
And maybe it's more worth it to walk away if you're really heated up and you're very emotional.
Oh, yeah.
Come back to it later, but not to dismiss it altogether, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a different story. You know, maybe you're not in the right context. You're in a meeting. Maybe you really got to get one-on-one with this person, you know, so wait for the right moment when you're not wanting to go.
I would agree with that. And I've been there myself, as I'm sure a lot of listeners have. So before you decide to walk away, let's consider those other two choices, which are really more effective. And the third option is you can change your attitude about the difficult person, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could think of them like a workout machine, and they're working out certain muscle groups. For example, somebody who's aggressive and a bully will work out your assertiveness muscles, whereas going to another extreme, people who are nothing people, they answer questions with, except on verbose day, I don't know. This is going to have to increase your muscles of patience to slow down, because it's going to take very long with them. So I think it's always wise to think there's always something in it for you, and it's a workout of your communication muscle.
I love that perspective change and switch. I think that's critical, right? To think that this person is here to help you out in some way with your leadership.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Whether it's becoming more assertive, whether it's trying to get a nothing person to talk, look at it in that frame it in that way, and it's really going to help you out versus you're going to have anxiety over it, right? You're going to say, well, I mean, you still have anxiety over it, but you're going to realize, yeah, there's some positive benefit by having this person on my team or working for me.
Yep.
Fourth and final option, you can change your behavior. So when you change the way you deal with difficult people, they have to learn new ways to deal with you. So just as certainly as some people bring out the best in you, some people are going to bring out the worst in you, and you have the same ability with others. So this is usually considered the best long-term solution, correct?
Yes, definitely. And it's going to be in the long term, not only with that person, but what you learn. Let's say you're more assertive, but you learn to slow down and really establish the pace with somebody who's a more nothing person. That's going to serve you in other areas of your life. And you may do it with somebody on your team, but all of a sudden your child becomes a nothing person. And maybe you now are a little less intense and you slow down and you're able to bring them back out. So it's whatever you learn is going to serve you in more than one place for sure.
Well, and I love this topic too, because a lot of the topics that we talk about, yes, they're designed to help you in work situations, but also in other life situations. This in particular, right? If you have kids and you're dealing with teenagers that are nothing persons, which we're going to talk about more later and unpack, skills equally applicable in the workplace as well as at home, right?
Yep, absolutely. What you learn in one place can apply in another place.
Wonderful. So talk to me a little bit about that lens of understanding and unpacking it and maybe differentiating between personality and looking at it from a behavior standpoint.
Yeah, that's what you really want to be careful of. There's all this personality typing. And I think if you think personality, it leads you astray. But you really want to think behavior, because behavior is here and now, and it's fluid. It's constantly changing. When a person's normal, then something triggers them. They blow up, throw a tantrum. Then they withdraw for a while. They're quiet. Then they're normal. Then they're whining. Then there's something else. And behavior is going to change according to two critical factors. One is context. Where are we? What's going on? Business meeting, social gathering, one-on-one. And the other is relationship. Who are you with? You might know somebody who seems to be a bully most of the time at work. They're pushy, they're aggressive. You wouldn't believe what a wimp they can be in some other context or some other relationship that you never get to see. So technically speaking, personality is a huge generalization. And people's personality is the sum total of all those behaviors in all those different contexts and all those different relationships. So be careful of personality typing. It's better to think behavior typing. If this is the behavior, somebody's being aggressive, what do they need from me right now? So the lens of understanding is about that behavior. And we found that, we have what we call the cooperation zone. And when we're in there together, there's no issues. And there are four general intents that we have. We want to get things done related to tasks, and also related to tasks. We want to get those things done right. Related to people, we want to get along with people, and we want to be appreciated by people. And depending on what, those are all important, but depending on context, where we are, what's going on in relationship, who we're with, one of those moves to the top. So they can change their hierarchy. The deadline is upon you. And so you're suddenly much more assertive with some of your coworkers than you may be, because the client's got to get it by 5 today, period. And they're very important to you. So your behavior changes. And the reason this is important is we can only pay attention to 7, give or take 2 things at one time consciously. And we have a part of our brainstem called our reticular activating system, which is like radar. So if you get married, you suddenly will see everyone's getting married. And if you have children, it looks like a baby bloom. And if you're interested in a certain car, there it goes again. A part of our brain is like radar. It's going, doot, 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 and then it takes your attention to whatever is going on for you at that time, or whatever you believe or are thinking about. So if I believe that somebody is negative, guess what I noticed? There they are again. Told you so. I knew nothing would work with that person. You can engage in the strategy for negativity. You could be having quite an impact, but you know what? You will not even notice it. Be careful. We have a limited amount of conscious attention, and we are programmed to selectively sort our perceptions to be right about whatever we believe. So this is not just a technical issue here. This is a very important fork in the road, that you put aside the idea of personality typing and think behavior. Okay, what's going on now? So when people are in those 4 intents, get it done, get it right, get along, get appreciated, They're still in a cooperation zone, as we call it. There's no conflict. But if they get a little stressed, or let's say something's not happening, all right, let's say somebody needs to get things done, the deadline's upon, and people around them are kind of distracted or going down unnecessary tangents, they might say, all right, look, people, here's what we need to do. You're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to, and they take charge, they take control, because if they can control it, then it happens. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it's really a good thing. It depends on really how they took charge, whether they become a tank and run over people or whether they just take charge. But that's good when people want to get it right, and if people around them are going, it's about 50, I think, they go, you think, and then they go into perfection, into those details that no one else is paying attention to. And that's a good thing, because we're going to get it right. If people want to get along and they're not sure it's happening, they go into approval, do things to make sure everything's okay between you. Would you like something? Can I get you something? And that creates good relationships too. And then if people want to be appreciated, it's not happening, they tend to go into attention, do things to get people to notice. So we call that the yellow zone. And it's caution, because it could from here go either way, go back to the green, or it could go out to the red. But when people are still in the yellow zone, there's a good intent there. It's just that they're seeing their intent is not being met. So the yellow zone sometimes is a solution. Somebody takes charge and moves us forward. Somebody makes sure the details are all covered. Somebody really establishes rapport with the client, gets them to understand that it's only going to be an hour late, but and then people will have different strengths on the team. Some people are going to be more the get it done one, and somebody is going to, you'll depend on them for the details. Someone else is going to be nice, et cetera. So it's like, it's in a team sport, in any team sport, people play different positions, and depending on the position they play, they might have a different primary responsibility. In a simplify, it's okay, defense or offense. Some people are more offensive, and some people's responsibility is defense. And so it is with our lens. But if people really get stressed out, then we found that there are a number of classic behaviors that they get into. Somebody wants to get it done and it's not happening, and they go beyond control and they become a tank. All right, people, I can't believe it must be a genetic mistake. You've been working on this 2 weeks, you're already 4 weeks behind. Here's what we're going to do. Charles, you're on the phone. You're doing this. You're calling the client. Boom. They basically declare martial law. And for them, it's black and white. You're either part of moving forward or you get eliminated. Anything that takes too long is going to escalate, right? Because they want to get it done yesterday. Anything they think is an irrelevant, a tangent, let's say at a meeting, is going to escalate. But anything they think is forward progress can de-escalate them out of that red zone. Right.
I love how you stated at start, it's the cooperation zone, right? Where there's 4 that you've identified: get it right, get it done, get along, or get appreciated. And if they don't feel like, let's just take the example of get it right. If they don't feel like that intent or that is connecting with the other person, then they go into the cautionary zone of get it right. People go to perfectionism, where they want everything done perfectly.
Yep.
And that's, like you said, the caution zone. And if their needs aren't met in that zone, then they go into the danger zone, which then they turn into different behavior types that you identified in this zone anyway, as the nothing person, or the no person, the whiner, the judge. Then you have a behavior that needs to be addressed. That's going to be a problem to the team, to the supervisor, to other people around them. So you want to hit these behaviors before they get into that red zone. Hopefully you can address them and correct them in the cautionary zone before they go into the red zone, and then you have a bigger issue to deal with. So I love the model. Now, is there certain behaviors that people default to when they get stressed out? So I can see where they're all in that kind of mind. So you have the get it right, get it done, get along, get appreciated. Mine probably would be to get it done. I just want things to be done, and I want to get things off my plate. And I can see where that need's not being met by someone where they're not getting it done, then I'm more controlling, right? Which is that yellow zone. Then if I find out that things still aren't being done after I've been more assertive, more controlling, then I can be perceived as either probably a tank or a know-it-all, right? Because then I feel like I need to escalate that behavior to make sure that it gets it done.
Yeah, that would probably go more, you'd probably go more tank, because know-it-all is, the problem with know-it-all is they really do know a lot. They really know a particular subject, but they don't really acknowledge knowledge in other people. And so they dominate meetings. They go on and on and on to hear themselves talk. They go down different tangents. Ego is definitely happening on the surface with know-it-all behavior. Even though it's in that get it done, they waste a lot of time, really, but they are controlling. They can control a meeting because everybody finally gives up and shuts down and becomes nothing people because it's just not worth it anymore. But staying, let's say, where you were or wanting to make things happen, let's say you're in middle management somewhere and someone higher above you tells you, no, you can't do that, or you can't get what you want. All right. Because someone has trumped you in that sense. Then you could, from get it done, into sniping. Fine, do it your way. Don't come crying to me when it doesn't work out. That would be kind of judgmental, sniping behind the back, gossip, all that category. It's when it's suppressed anger or suppressed resentment when you can't actually achieve what you're trying to achieve.
No, that's great. And, that's why I love this model is it identifies what area you kind of default into. And if you know your team well enough, what area they kind of default into, and then what they're going to turn into if their needs aren't being met at certain levels. And then the best part of it is you're providing strategies, approaches that are effective for each one of these behaviors in the red zone that needs to be addressed, because then it's going to affect productivity of the team dynamics. They're going to be a cancer on the team, possibly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love how you've identified that, and you covered really, I would say, close to the gamut of these behaviors. I'm sure there's nuances within each category, but for the most part, I think this provides a definitive collection of problem behaviors and ways to fix them.
Yeah, let's go through the leads here and just name some. And we already had coming out of Get It Done, we had tank, and then we had sniper. That's resentment. Let me see if I could lower my IQ so I could have a meaningful dialogue with you. Ooh, don't get all emotional. Can't you take a joke? Sniping to the face behind the back. Okay. But at a Get It Done, it's usually malicious. There's some kind of anger, resentment there. We also have our true know-it-all. Then if we go into the Get It Right quadrant and you have perfection, that's where you get whining and negativity because they're feeling helpless. Whining is a feeling of being helpless. Negativity is hopeless. But negativity is kind of aggressive in a way because it has all the arrogance of a know-it-all seduced by the dark side of the force. Nothing's going to work. Never tried it. We did that. Not that. Okay. What you also get there is get it done. There's a get it right. Nothing. Fine. Do it your way. Don't come crying to me when it doesn't work out. Now you also get a different kind of nothing out of that more get along people oriented area of the lens where people want approval. So let's face it. If you don't have something nice to say, I wouldn't want to hurt your feelings. So I say nothing. What you also get there is yes behavior. People are really agreeable on the surface, but you don't really know where they stand. In fact, sometimes they could be agreeable on the surface, but then become a sniper behind your back, what we call passive aggressive. Or what happens a lot out of that quadrant is you say, oh, I need this report on Friday. Okay, sure. What time you need it? Okay, sure. And they just agree to stuff, but they didn't really look at their schedule and figure out what they have going on. And then they don't keep commitments they've made because in the moment they're face to face with somebody, they're in get along approval. So they say yes, they're not doing task calculations. And then you get the same kind of thing, but it relates to decisions. That's where you get maybe behavior. I mean, certainly all of us at some point told the salesperson, I'll think about it. Were we really planning on thinking about it? No, approval-oriented behavior. Shifting gears, if we go to that get attention area of the lens, we get a grenade, which is the tantrum. Nobody cares. That's the problem with the world today. It's the government's fault. It's explosive and it's intense, but it seems more irrational. When a tank is attacking, you know what it's about. When a grenade is blowing up, you're going, what? Huh? It just is too
Comes out of left field.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what's going on.
And a lot of what they rant and rave about have nothing to do with what's going on presently. So there you also get into that attention, another kind of sniper. This is friendly fire. This is friendly teasing between people, and yay, you should sue your brains or not support. And they could be really genuinely kidding, but it could cause other problems. And then from there, you also get think they know it all behavior where people act like they do, but they really don't. They have such an ego need for attention. And then you mentioned the judge. That also comes out of that get it right area where people go into this judging, but they're not really being constructive in any way to change things. And then when you cross a judge with a tank right at the top of the lens, you get a martyr. They're doing all these things for people, but they really want the appreciation in return. But the things they do are not anybody wants, so they're not getting the appreciation. So they try even harder, and around we all go. We found those are the 13 top behaviors.
No, and that's great. And we unfortunately don't have time to unpack them all, but that's a great overview of what they are. So if you, our listeners, want more information, this book is great to unpack them, to get you more understanding around them. Not only this book, but one about relatives, equally good, that will help you out in a more personal space as well, just to give you insight into, okay, here's the cooperation zone, like we mentioned, and here's the positive behavior that they're trying to exude. But when their needs aren't being met, it goes from that cautionary zone into the red zone, into these destructive behaviors. And here's great strategies to deal with them. I would argue, though, the first step is, if you want to identify who this person is, to get to know more about what their issues truly are, you need to be a good listener. And you get some great steps on, really, this is the first step of that model. To be a conscious communicator, you need to improve your listening skills. First, it's listening, and not only listening, but actively listening, right? By nodding, by making sounds, not just pretending, because even in a virtual space, and if you're like you and I are right now, we can see each other's facial expressions, and you get a sense pretty quickly if the other person's really attentive and listening to you versus just passively just nodding, right?
Right, right. Yeah, listening to you want to influence people's behavior. The first thing you want is for them to feel understood. And it's a great general rule. Always let people feel understood first. People really feel understood, the doors to their mind go, "Er," and they get wide open. And if you try to be understood first, a lot of times you're just bang your head against the closed door. So you don't need the headache. And so that's a good thing to practice. And what I found, what works for me personally, is even if I think I'm sure I understand, I assume I probably don't. And I'm going to go a minimum of 3 to 4 layers, 3 to 4 questions deeper than when I think I really do understand already. And whenever I have done that, it always opens up some other factors that are really critical, that really would matter, that I would miss altogether. It's a really, listening is simple. The first phase is, you said, you nod and grunt, you give meaningful looks, occasional, huh, meh. And then at one point you stop and you basically backtrack. Backtrack means you say back what somebody says to you. So you give a complete backtrack summary.
But don't rephrase exactly, right?
Do not rephrase. Say it as they said it. Words are symbols to represent experience. Symbols have a personal meaning. If I take your symbols and I translate them, you're going to think what I changed it into is not what you meant, and you will not feel understood. You want to leave it in their words. But now, how many words you give back definitely varies according to where people are in the lens. If somebody's being a tank, we're going to do some greatest hits, but ultimately we have to move forward fast. At its other extreme, if people are being know-it-alls or whiners, we're going to have to do highly detailed, copious backtracking. Know-it-all's got to know that you know how much they know if they're going to hear what you have to say. And so how many does vary, but you definitely want to think of this. All right, phase 1, non-grunt. Phase 2, backtrack, clarify. Backtrack, clarify. Assume you don't understand, ask questions to go deeper. Then at one point you go to 3, step 3, which is you summarize, kind of a complete backtrack summary of what you heard so far. Then that's sometimes when when you do that, people kind of get, oh, this is what I've given you. Oh, this is what I haven't told you yet. That's really important. You kind of reflect what you got. And so then you're back in backtrack, clarify, and then summarize, backtrack, clarify, and summarize. So you go through those a few times. And then when you think you're ready to lead to something, you should come out of a summary with a question. So blah, 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 blah. Do you feel like I understand? Shall we solve your problem now? You want to have a formal transition where you're going to now lead to something. And it's the best way to do that is with a question. Make sure that they first agree you understand. And then your next question is leading somewhere. Well, shall we do something about it? Should we brainstorm how we can solve this problem, or whatever that might be? And to just always assume you don't understand, even if you're sure, and go deeper. You'll be surprised how often whether it was a nuance or really significant, more often than not, you don't understand really. And if you develop that skill to always let people go first to be understood, you're going to wipe out half the conflict in your life right out of the gate.
No, that's so essential. I love this model. I've used it a lot personally and professionally. It works. The listening, and then the one step you didn't really mention, but we can just talk about briefly, the blending. And the blending
Yeah.
basically is just letting them know through nonverbal behavior that they're understood. Maybe they're moving into you, you're moving in well, or as well to them. Something that really just mirrors them to some extent to make them unconsciously feel like, yes, this person's connecting with me, maybe at a deeper level. And then backtrack, clarify, and summarize. Go through, like you said, a couple rounds of that. And at some point, the one of the sticking points in this, though, is at what point do you move to a solution? Do you say, do you feel understood? Is there anything else? Because if they keep bringing more stuff up, at some point you need to cut them off and say, okay, now is the time for a solution. When would that part be, Rick, if you're having someone that's really just unloading and you have spent maybe a half an hour and you're open the conversation, maybe it'll last 15 minutes. When do you cut them off and how do you do that effectively?
Well, you'd probably go, well, what do you want right now? What do you want? If they keep going. So what do you want? This is what you have to do with whining, because whining is in big generalizations, but specifics are the first step to problem solving. And so that you say, what's wrong? They say everything's wrong. What specifically? All of it. When does it occur? It happens all the time. Who's doing it? Everybody. And you're going to have to like be relentless. And even if you recycle questions, that's okay, to get deep into that deeper structure. But in answer to your question, when do you move forward? It's the other factors. How much time are we? Are we in a meeting now with somebody and we just dealt with a know-it-all and we got to finish this meeting in 10 minutes? So your logistics and situations are probably going to dictate that. You might, all right, we have to continue this conversation later, but I appreciate you sharing with me how you felt about what happened on that project, whatever. So it's really the logistics of things, I think, that dictate how much time you have and is it worth the amount of time. But I do want to circle back to something you said, blending, because we didn't mention that concept. And blending is in a multitude of ways. And you mentioned one of them, body language, nodding. If you and I are getting along, you're sitting, I want to be sitting. You lean forward, I lean forward. You lean back, I lean back. And you can get to, you get a little itch and suddenly I get itchy in the same place. This is direct body mirroring, as you mentioned. Sometimes people do something indirect. Somebody could be a foot wiggler and you don't get your foot going, but before you know it, you've got a pen going. Similar, but different. So there's that body language blending. And then there's verbal blending. If somebody says, it was incredible, we go, it was. Oh, you should have been there. I should have. When you match their volume and intensity and their verbal, that's blending. And then where we started was having people feel understood, which is one of the most powerful blending skills you can ever develop. The first two are more unconscious, the body language and the verbal, but the conscious part is understanding.
No, that's great. And I even like how you break it into the quadrants of the lens of understanding. So in applying blending strategy to the four intents that people have, the get it done intent would be keep your communication with them brief, right? And to the point so as not to obstruct them. Then you'll increase understanding and decrease misunderstanding.
Definitely.
The get it right one is, well, okay, blending would mean pay attention to the details because they want to make sure you get it right. And you don't miss any of the specifics that are essential. The get along dimension or intent is show that you care, that you're considerate, that friendly chit chat. Don't make it just all business, but make sure that you're taking care of the whole person. And then the final quadrant of the lens of understanding, the get appreciated intent is recognize their contributions, be enthusiastic with appreciation. So, right, those would be other ways they could use blending based off of the intent of the other person.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the listening part, right? So we want to make sure that we start with that step. There's a few other parts of this whole model that I think really we can at least touch upon, maybe not unpack fully, but one of them really is kind of telling your truth in a way that builds them up rather than tears them down. So this is really for feedback. This is for that kind of communication where you really want them to take the advice, to take the feedback. You want to make sure you do it the right way. And you give some great keys to open and honest conversations. One of them is use I language. So don't assume that this is something that is just everyone understood, but from my point of view or the way I see it,
Mm-hmm.
And that works for me. That works on the personal level, that works
Yeah.
on the professional level. Because so often you say maybe to your spouse, well, you're not doing things, you're lazy, or you're not doing it the right way, versus what I see right here. And I'm really speaking now to more observable behaviors,
Yes.
not trying to assassinate their character. I'm just saying, here's what I've observed, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it separates it. You're not saying that this is the way it is on the tablets that were brought down on high. This is just how I'm looking at it. And so it allows for two different opinions simultaneously.
So use that I language, take it from my point of view, be specific about the problem behavior. Don't look at the personality like we talked about before. Look at it from, give specific examples. Don't make generalizations,
Mm,
which I think a lot of people do professionally and personally. Every time we meet, you always exaggerate
yeah, right. Hmm.
right? So you want to make sure you get specific with that problem behavior. You want to show them how the behavior is self-defeating. And this could be a blind spot for that individual.
Right,
So
right.
you might have to give examples really to illuminate it for them. And hopefully they don't get defensive as a result of it. And then suggesting new behaviors or options, right? Which I think that's where a lot of managers, leaders kind of fall off, right? They show them the way and then they expect them to say, okay, they should know what to do.
Hmm.
But in many cases, the biggest obstacle is they don't want to hurt their feelings. But then you don't want to stop it at just here's this self-defeating behavior. A lot of times you have to connect the dots for them and say, okay, here's new behavior options that you could do
Yeah.
that are more acceptable, right?
Yeah. If they had those dots, they would have connected them. So yeah,
There you go.
you're establishing
Exactly. I love that. Yes.
establish a new pattern. And then it's going to be super critical that you observe. And anytime they take a step that's different, they acted in this way, you say, thank you. That was great what you did. Oh, I really appreciate that. When I asked you if you could do it by Friday and you said, let me think about it so I can make a realistic commitment. That's perfect. That was great. So you really want to come back with that feedback loop of acknowledgement and appreciation. It's like, you're trying to cultivate a new behavior. So you want to nourish it.
Well, that's so difficult because a lot of people look at the feedback, right, as constructive or corrective feedback. They don't know that they need to have a lot more positive feedback and reinforce those behaviors that they see happening, which takes time,
Mhm.
takes effort.
Yeah.
But if you want to cultivate that culture, it starts with that individual doing it consistently.
Yes, definitely does.
Let's try to unpack at least two of these difficult behaviors in a little more detail to help our listeners out. Like to take the first two are on two extremes. One is very confrontational, in your face, the tank behavior. They're pointed, they're angry, they're aggressive. It's what you say is the most honest behavior, but what you shouldn't do, and then I'll let you talk about what you should do. What you shouldn't do is you shouldn't shut down and
Right.
become a nothing person because they don't respect that, the
Yeah.
tank. You shouldn't defend, explain, or justify your position because they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to elevate the situation and counterattack. So two tanks are now going at it, and it just escalates the situation to something much worse. So those are what you should not do. What should you do when someone comes and confronts you and exhibits that tank behavior?
Well, you're going to have to up your assertiveness level. Technically speaking, tank to tank warfare is an option. You think you can be better tank. You say, make my day, but you might not do that in all contexts of relationships, but you're going to have to up your assertiveness level. Everything's got to happen more quickly. The tank is about making it happen yesterday. So there's no lengthy stuff here. It's going to be very direct and to the point. I would say, if the tank is yelling you, it's always good for people to get a little bit out of their system, but you don't want to let a tank vent for too long because the tank is demanding action. And if people just freeze, there's just inaction and that escalates the tank further. So I'd say 60 seconds or less before you interrupt the attack. Best way to interrupt is say their name a few times. Do not comment on marital status of their parents' canine gender. You say, sir, Frank, Mr. Bender, Mr. Bender. And then without waiting for an opening, you backtrack some greatest hits. I hear you think we're genetic mistakes and we're way behind. You bet you're way behind. Your will's going to cost us, sir. Here it's going to cost us. So now you're in a moment of you just gave, I'm listening to you. And they say a little more and you butt in, you go, I'm listening to you. They say a little more, I'm listening to you. I would say 3 rounds of that before you take the next step. And this is because of something in human behavior called the generalization point. If we drive someplace and we stop at 2 or 3 red lights in a row, we say, all the lights are red today. If we meet 2 or 3 people in a bad mood, we say, everybody's in a bad mood today. This is the generalization point. It only takes 2, 3, you're over the top. So when I go interrupt, backtrack 1, I'm listening, interrupt, backtrack 2, I'm listening, interrupt, backtrack 3, I'm listening. I'm letting the tank know that they're being heard. And then from there, we go right to the bottom line of the situation. Now, what you say depends on the situation, but it's always short and to the point. The ideal bottom line is to establish some kind of common intent that you and they are really on the same side. I tell you, I saw this happen at a lost luggage claim once. You know, I'm the second person in line. The guy in front of me is tanking the person at the counter as if she purposely mislabeled his bags and sent them to Canada. So he's going on and on and on. And all of a sudden she puts her pen down. She goes, sir, 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 I get this is very inconvenient for you and you think we're total idiots for losing your luggage. Backtrack, blend, I'm listening. However, there are only 2 people at this counter who care about recovering your luggage. And of those 2 people, one of them is quickly losing interest. And he said, what do you need to know first? Now, consider what you know. 2 people are at the counter who care about the luggage. Your intent now is get your bags back. My intent, get your bags back. Same side, common purpose, and your behavior is defeating our purpose. And he got it. And therein lies a really big advantage of dealing with tank behavior. You can be very direct, very blunt, and they don't take that as rude. You know, it's the proverbial high school bully you stand up to and then becomes best friend, because assertive people like assertive people. So obviously there's some inner game here, you know, within your own head and attitude to be able to get yourself to do that, especially if you're more passive. But that is what it's going to take.
No, that's great, because you need to command respect, because tanks don't attack people they respect.
Right.
But let's say at the end here, say that their accusations of you are untrue. Their perceptions unrealistic. Their demands were maybe unfair. So now you're saying you must redirect to a peaceful solution by offering them the last word, but you should be able to decide where and when, correct?
Yes. And really what happens at the end there, it would really depend on who we talking with, what's our relationship, is this our boss, our coworker, a
If it's
customer?
your boss and they're coming in and it's not true what they're saying, how can you have peace with honor?
Well, I would probably want to get to a point where if I feel like they are perceiving something in a certain way, and I think it's not happening that way, then there's a very important thing called behavioral definitions. These behaviors equals this concept. So whatever concept they think should be happening there, the behaviors they're seeing are not equaling that. Whereas they might really be going in that direction, but they don't perceive it that way. So then we want to understand what they're, you know, everybody needs to be focused on this. Then you'd go, the magic question is, all right, you know, it's behavioral definitions. So people say you don't, whatever, but you know, you do. That means it's a behavioral definition. And you say, all right, I would want you to, all right, let's say with, you know, the team has to be focused. Everybody's just doing things all over the place. All right, sir, how would you know if the team was focused? What specifically would you see or hear that would let
So
you?
it's down to observable specifics. So you
Yes,
clarify
observable
your definition.
behaviors. These behaviors equals to them, the team is focused and on task. So you may know they're on task, but the things that the tank is looking for that represents it in their mind are being missed. And
So it's clarifying that, getting a very specific detailed understanding of what they mean by that, so you could address that more specifically.
exactly.
How about when their accusations are true and you did do something incorrectly, you made a mistake?
Then you say, thank you. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Here's what we're going to do about it. Okay. You don't have to go through what you don't want to do is defend, explain, and justify. That's called dextify. Oh, but we thought of this. I don't know. Flush that. Not with a tank. It'd be like, thank you. Here's what we're going to do about it. It's a future focused, action oriented is what you want to do with them.
So you recognize or you acknowledge to them, yes, I did make that mistake.
Yes.
Won't happen again in the future because of these things that I'm going to do to correct the situation.
Perfect.
And be done with it.
In fact, you did something really important there where here's what we're going to do about it, but you want these actions in the future. Here's what we're going to do in the future to make sure this never happens again. So there's 2 futures. There's one, let's say the immediate thing, we're going to take care of it. We'll call the client. We'll handle this tomorrow. And here's what we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. So maybe actions that are beyond the current situation. Because sometimes what happens is you solve the problem and the tank keeps going. And what's usually going on at that moment is they're already in the future seeing it happen again with a more important client, boom. And so they're attacking about a fantasy in the future. So that's terrific. Charles, you passed. You did.
All right. That's taking a corrective action to fix a solution, to fix a problem right now. And then you give them a game plan to make sure that that kind of problem doesn't happen in the future.
Yes.
Perfect. So that's on the aggressive side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum, the passive side of the spectrum, is the nothing person, which we see a lot more in this virtual world, where this behavior becomes increasingly geared toward gaining approval and avoiding disapproval. And it could be wishy-washy. It could be yes, maybe people, or just really the passive nothing person. How do you engage them into conversations, getting them more engaged? What you should not do, and then you can go into what you should do, is you shouldn't be impatient and be frustrated with them and drive nothing people into deeper nothingness. And then you should not get, to where your frustration can turn easily into aggressive communication, which will guarantee that you get nothing out of this person. Being impatient with a get along, nothing people who are trying to already avoid conflict and disapproval, you're going to drive them further down that path of nothingness. So that's what you should not do. What should you do for these nothing people?
Well, one thing depends on our context. Are we talking about our child, or are we talking about people at a meeting, virtual or?
Let's do a virtual team, right? Say they're part of a virtual team or a hybrid team. It's not in a personal context. I mean, we can talk about that too, because I think that's great for teenagers, right? So, there's some insights into that, but let's first talk about it in a workplace setting.
Well, in a meeting context, first of all, and in general, in any meeting, whether we're talking virtual or in person or hybrid, whatever, some people are going to talk too much and other people are not going to talk at all based on their assertiveness level. And I urge people to think in terms of holographic thinking. This is how your eyes work. Your two eyes see, you take your finger like this and you close your right eye and then open and now close your left eye. The finger seems to move back and forth. Isn't that incredible? Your two eyes see from two different points of view. Imagine them arguing whose point of view is correct. They're both correct. They're both different. And when your brain synthesizes the points of view, you see three dimensions. This is why we can perceive depth. If we let assertive people dominate in the meeting and passive people drop out, we lose the hologram automatically. And so in any kind of meeting, there should be some sort of speaking order. All right. I'd say there could be a voluntary speaking order. Maybe people raise their hand, whether it's to use the virtual hand in, let's say, a Zoom or such, and they get called on. So all they have to do is this, because otherwise, if there's no speaking order, your assertive people are going to listen for each other's breathing changes. And when one person stops, they jump in. Meanwhile, all the passives just drop out. Personally, what I like is a speaking order that you establish. We're just going to go around the room, and we're going to go in alphabetical order today by first name. Next time, maybe we go alphabetical by last name. You can mix up the order, but you simply go around the room and you call on people as the leader. And then you're going to be guaranteed you're going to hear from everybody, because nobody has to interrupt anybody else. Everybody's getting their turn. There should always be a speaking order. And I'd say it's got to be voluntary if you have too many people, but if you've got a dozen or less, going around the room is a great way to do it. And then you're going to ensure you hear from people. And then what you also should do is what I call flight recording, where whatever people say, you summarize it in a way they can see. So a blank PowerPoint slide is great for this. In the title area, you put whatever it's about. All right, we're going to move the office. Okay, it's the office move. And then as we go around the room and people make comments, whatever they you bullet that order. And what happens is with visual communication, it remains over time. So that point is still in our consciousness. If we didn't have that visual information, people are going to repeat themselves to make sure it's heard, because what you say exists and then it's gone. So you could have, and without the speaking order, one person's going to repeat a bunch of stuff a couple of times. Other people who agree with them are going to do it a couple of times. Whereas if you bullet what people say, when it's one person's turn, they may, I agree with what Charles said about this and this. And what I'd like to add is this, let them let you know what they think, but then they add something to the mix. And I have found this totally eliminates conflict at meeting, and you will get a higher quality result in half the time of the meeting.
Love those tips. Now let's move into the personal space, even with individuals. I love how you state it, and I've used this as well. Ask open-ended questions expectantly. So if you have a nothing teenager, if you have a nothing employee, try not to ask questions that can be answered with a yes, no, or a grunt, right?
Right, right.
Use words like who, what, where, when, how, depending on the topic of the discussion, and request a specific information about their thoughts, right? What are you thinking? How do you want to proceed? So that it forces them to talk more than giving you one word answers.
Yes, those are all good questions. It's the pace that you have to slow down with them, with nothing people. So, okay. Well, I hear that how would you like to proceed? And they say something, and you go, well, can you backtrack that? Maybe you think for a moment, because you're trying to blend with them. You're blending with their pace. So you can't, if you go too fast with nothing person, it's going to be a third degree and you push them deeper into nothingness. You have to really slow down and meet them where they are. And that's the trick, is slowing down, really.
No, that's great. I mean, I know I practice it with my teenagers is lighten it up, right? When nothing else is
Absolutely.
working,
Yeah.
a little humor can go a long way. Make it absurd, make it exaggerated just
Yeah.
to get them to crack a smile and lighten the mood
Oh, yeah.
and maybe bring down some of that armor.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, humor with anybody anywhere in the lens, it knocks them out of the red zone if you get them to laugh.
But a lot of time, some people aren't good with the humor or they don't feel it's appropriate. So you can also just guess, right? If the
Oh,
next
yeah.
person has remained silent and nothing else has gotten results, you can always exercise that option, right?
Yes. You start with, I don't know what's going on for you, but if I was you and I was in this situation, I might be thinking da da da, da, or maybe no, maybe this, or perhaps that. It's all not this is what it would be, but maybe this, perhaps that. I don't know, but maybe this. You're putting all these things out there, and what's the great about guessing is if you hit on something, the jig is up, and they usually come out and tell you what's going on. And if you don't come close at all, you're totally out on another planet. Usually that brings them out because they feel sorry for no conception of reality. Here's what's going on for me. So guessing is like can't miss strategy.
The other strategy that works with these individuals is kind of show them the future, right? The only way to get a nothing person talking maybe is to take them out of this one moment in time,
Yeah.
show them the consequences of continued silence in the future. And then perhaps they can find enough perspective and motivation then to open up. It
Right.
doesn't always work, but that could be an effective strategy as well, right?
Absolutely. You're basically taking them on a walk into the future. If it continues like this, then this is going to happen. And we're whatever, what we say depends on our situation, relationships, et cetera. But you take nothing into the future and show them a future that they really don't want to have.
This has been great, Rick. I'd love to have you back on the podcast to unpack a few more of these, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this episode. So I always like to end each episode with a call to action. What would be the first thing a leader, an individual could do to get better at this in dealing with difficult people? What would be that first step for them to take?
Well, you want to observe, you want to learn from all your experience. The good thing about this communication stuff is you don't have to go out of your way to learn it. It's around you all the time. You just have to keep a part of yourself, what's called meta, like a periscope, paying it attention at a different level to what's going on. And then it's very useful then afterwards to kind of debrief with yourself. Well, what did work? What didn't work? And what I encourage people to do is establish a communication partner, somebody. This is what my co-author Rick and I did, and how we started everything with our career. Is we would meet on lunch on Friday. We would divide it in half. Half hour was focused on him. What'd you notice this week in community? What did you try? What worked? What didn't work? What are you going to do next week with that person? And then half on me. What'd you notice? What'd you try? What worked? What didn't work? And because we had that debrief, we could look back at our experience and learn from it. You're going to have enough experience. You don't have to worry about that. You just have to stay conscious. And then because you're meeting with this person once a week, you're going to pay attention at a different level, and you're going to have that reflective moment. It's such a simple thing to do, but it would be totally transformative.
Well, you're right. It's such a simple thing to do. It's just remembering to do it consistently enough for the results to pay off, which I think is critical.
Yeah, and you might not pay attention the first week, but if I have lunch with Charles and you tell me all this stuff that you observed, I'm like, oh my God, I did terrible. All right, this week I'm paying attention.
So critical to have that accountability partner. You're right.
Yes.
Well, remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you, Rick.
Well, drrickbrinkman.com, drrickbrinkman.com is probably the best way to contact. You can email me through there. Book Dealing with People You Can't Stand and Dealing with Meetings You Can't Stand are definitely the two texts if anybody wanted to follow up on that, and they're available everywhere. Amazon. People You Can't Stand is in 25 languages. It seems that everybody in the world can't stand each other, and Meetings is in quite a few languages also. And that will transform your meetings. I mean, it is so simple to transform your meetings. And the beautiful thing about transforming a meeting, if you come up with a suggestion, you don't run the meeting, but you say to the person, hey, who runs it, how'd you like to hear an idea that makes our meeting shorter, more productive? It's a rare human being says, wow, we don't want that. What are we going to do for waste of time and misery? It's so easy to transform meetings, and that book will tell you how.
Love both those books. And thank you again for joining me today. This concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you'd like to subscribe, this podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify. It can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know that makes a difference, but what you do consistently.